The airplane aisle felt narrow as passengers slowly made their way toward their seats. The flight was almost full. People were trying to balance bags on their shoulders while searching for row numbers printed above their heads. In the middle of all this movement walked a father and his young daughter. She kept close to him, holding his sleeve gently, the way children do when they feel tired or just want to stay near the person they trust most. The father moved calmly, checking their boarding passes twice to make sure he was guiding her to the right row. The girl did not say much at first. She had already told her dad earlier that she felt a little tired, but nothing else. It had been a long day with travel, meetings, and walking through crowded places, and she usually handled everything well. But today, she felt slightly off, and her dad noticed this right away. Every few steps he looked down at her, trying to read her face, making sure she was doing okay. She managed a soft smile each time, but her eyes revealed that she wanted to sit down soon. When they finally reached their row, the father lifted their small bag into the overhead bin. He took his time so he would not bump anyone. The girl sat down and leaned against the window, closing her eyes for a moment. The father sat beside her and checked his watch, then checked her again. He saw that she looked a little pale. She rubbed her hands together slowly, like someone who was trying to get rid of a strange feeling in her fingers. He asked her quietly if she felt all right. She nodded, but then whispered that her mouth felt dry. That was the detail he had been waiting for and hoping he would not hear. A dry mouth, a little dizziness, the need to lean back, these were signs he recognized instantly. Her body sometimes sent little warnings like this, reminders that she needed water or a quick snack to balance her blood levels. It did not happen often, but when it did, it needed attention. He pressed the small call button above his seat. A soft chime rang through the cabin. The girl opened her eyes, watching him but not speaking. He smiled gently to reassure her. "It's okay," he whispered, as if he could pour calmness directly into her through his voice. After a minute, a flight attendant approached their row. She had a look on her face that made her seem rushed, as if she had already dealt with too many things at once and wanted to finish doing them quickly. She asked, in a tone that sounded tired, if everything was all right. The father explained in a polite voice that his daughter needed a cup of water. He made sure to speak clearly and calmly, and he even apologized for bothering her before takeoff. The attendant looked at the girl, then back at him, and then her expression changed slightly. Instead of concern, a rigid look formed on her face, as if she wanted to make something very clear. She told him sharply that no drinks could be served before takeoff and that they had to wait. The father tried to explain again, gently, that it was for a medical reason, but she cut him off, repeating the rule in an even firmer tone, then walked away before he could finish his sentence. The father took a slow breath, not a frustrated one, just a controlled one. He had dealt with difficult people before. His life required him to do that almost daily. But it was different when someone spoke like that in front of his daughter. He looked at the girl again. She tried to act normal, but he could see the discomfort building. Her hands were starting to tremble a little, and she pressed her lips together as if trying to lock in the feeling of dryness. He spoke softly to her again, telling her everything would be all right, even as he felt a growing urgency that made him want to move faster. He gave her the small, comfort snacks he always carried in his bag, but she didn't feel like chewing anything yet. The water was what she needed first. He waited a minute or two, hoping the attendant would return on her own. The girl shifted in her seat, curling her legs slightly, trying to find a position that made the strange feeling inside her less noticeable. Outside the window, the plane was still connected to the gate. No one had announced anything about takeoff yet. There was plenty of time for a tiny cup of water. The father pressed the call button again. The chime sounded the same as before, but the girl watched it this time, almost as if she expected something magical to happen. She kept her eyes on the aisle, waiting to see if someone would come. The same attendant returned, and the father once again explained the situation. He kept his voice calm, respectful, and soft. He even lowered his tone so the girl would not feel embarrassed or think that any of this was her fault. But the attendant's face hardened even more. This time, she sounded annoyed as she told him his request was against procedure and that he should have prepared better before boarding. The father blinked slowly. He had prepared. He always prepared. He carried everything he could carry, but sometimes a child needed water at an unexpected moment, and that was normal. He tried to explain that. The attendant didn't want to hear it. She repeated herself again, louder than before, then walked off without waiting for an answer. A few people sitting nearby glanced over, but most looked away immediately, the way strangers often do when they see an uncomfortable moment unfolding but don't know whether to get involved. The father turned fully toward his daughter. He reached for her hand. Her skin felt cool, which was not a good sign. She said quietly that she felt a bit dizzy. He rubbed her hand gently, telling her again that he was there and he would fix it. She nodded, trusting him, the way only a child can trust someone who has never let them down. He kept his eyes on the aisle, waiting to see if perhaps someone else would appear. Maybe a different attendant, maybe someone more understanding, but no one came. The announcement system clicked on instead. The cabin crew asked everyone to make sure their seat belts were fastened as the plane prepared for departure. The father's heartbeat quickened. But he hid his worry from his daughter. She was already struggling. She didn't need to feel scared too. He squeezed her hand again, leaning close enough so she could hear him over the settling noises of passengers clicking seatbelts. The plane door closed with a noticeable thud. The girl flinched slightly, rubbing her forehead. The father pressed the call button a third time. He knew he should not have to do this again, but he also knew he would press it 10 more times if that is what his daughter needed. A different attendant noticed the light this time from a few rows back, but before she could come over, the first attendant quickly stepped in front of her. She whispered something that the father could not hear, and the second attendant stepped back. Giving the first one full control of the situation, the first attendant came to their row again. But her tone had changed from annoyed to sharp, almost as if she were preparing to warn him. She told him he needed to stop pressing the button and that the rules were clear. The father pointed gently toward his daughter, trying once more to make her understand that this was not about convenience or personal preference. But she seemed determined not to care. The daughter looked down at her lap. She didn't want anyone arguing around her. She didn't want to cause trouble. She whispered that she was okay, though her voice sounded faint. The father knew she was saying that only so the conversation would stop. He thanked the attendant calmly and did not press the button again. Instead, he reached into his bag, searching for anything that could help her until he could get water. A few snacks, a juice box he kept for emergencies. He found it. But it was warm and she didn't feel like drinking the sugary liquid yet. She just needed simple water first. The father opened the juice anyway and encouraged her to sip a tiny bit. She tried, but her stomach tightened. The dryness in her mouth made it hard to swallow. She leaned her head against his shoulder, trying to breathe slowly, focusing on anything that would help her stay calm. Passengers around them had grown silent. Some pretended to look at their phones, though their eyes flicked up every few seconds. They could sense something wasn't right. A few of them started whispering softly, the kind of whisper that travels even when people try to keep it quiet. The father kept reassuring his daughter. He stroked her hair lightly, letting his touch do what his words couldn't. Her breathing steadied a little, though she still looked uncomfortable. He watched her closely, taking mental notes about every small change in her face or posture. Outside, the plane began pulling back from the gate. The engines rumbled softly. The girl swallowed, but her throat felt tight. She closed her eyes again, not from sleepiness, but because the light felt too bright. The father held her hand between both of his, warming it gently. A passenger in the row behind them leaned forward slightly and, in a quiet voice, asked if everything was all right. The father nodded politely, not wanting to cause a scene or make anyone feel involved in something they did not understand. The girl whispered that she felt a little better, but she only said it because she noticed the worry in her father's eyes. The father glanced at the aisle once more, hoping to catch the attention of any other flight attendant, but the first attendant stayed near the front, arms crossed as if guarding her position. She watched the passengers with the stiff, patient look of someone who believed she had already made the right decision and didn't want anyone questioning it. The father breathed in slowly, then out again. He could not change her behavior, but he could stay calm, and he could do whatever he needed to do to help his daughter through the next few minutes until the plane reached a point where service could begin. He rested his hand on her back and whispered soothing words. She listened, eyes still closed, trying to let his voice anchor her. The father kept speaking to her, quiet and steady, doing everything he could to make her feel safe. The plane continued its slow movement across the ground, but inside their row, time felt different. Every few seconds felt longer than usual. Every breath the girl took made the father's chest tighten with concern. He did not raise his voice. He did not argue. He did not create any scene. He simply held his daughter's hand, watching her with steady eyes, waiting for the moment he could finally get her what she needed. But he knew something with absolute certainty. This would not be the end of the situation. The flight attendant's refusal had not just been careless, it had been dangerous. And though he remained calm, he knew that as soon as the right moment came, he would make sure his daughter's safety was no longer dependent on someone who did not seem to care. For now, though, he stayed by her side, giving her every bit of comfort he could. And even as the plane rolled forward, he quietly prepared himself for whatever he would need to do next. The plane moved slowly across the runway, its wheels humming softly beneath the passengers' feet. Inside the cabin, most people had settled into their seats, trying to get comfortable for the journey ahead. Some opened books, some scrolled through their phones, and others leaned back with their eyes closed, preparing to relax until the flight reached the sky. But in the middle section of the plane, there was one row where the atmosphere felt tense, almost fragile, like something could break at any moment. The father kept his arm around his daughter, trying to block out the chaos that had unfolded only minutes earlier. He whispered small reassurances into her ear, hoping she would feel safe even though she was clearly struggling. She sat, curled toward him, her forehead lightly pressed against his side. Every so often, she took a slow breath, as if trying to steady a wave of discomfort rising inside her body. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers slightly trembling, though she tried hard to hold them still. She did not like showing weakness. She didn't want people around her to worry or think something was wrong. But her body made its own decisions sometimes, and today it wasn't cooperating. Her throat felt dry, almost scratchy, making each swallow feel like she was trying to swallow air. Her head felt light, as though it might float away if she didn't lean against her father. He kept watching her closely, his eyes soft but alert, noticing every small twitch of her fingers and every shift in her breathing. He had seen these symptoms before, and he knew what she needed. Water. Simple water. Something so basic that he couldn't understand why the flight attendant had refused it so strongly. He replayed the moment in his mind, trying to see if he had done anything wrong, but he couldn't find a single thing. He had spoken politely. He had explained clearly. He had even apologized for asking. And still, she had dismissed him. The plane paused for a moment, as if waiting its turn to move. The pause allowed the tension in the cabin to settle even deeper. The daughter looked around slowly, her eyes scanning the passengers around them. She saw a few people glancing toward her and quickly looking away when she noticed. She felt a little embarrassed, unsure if she had caused too much attention. She whispered to her father that she was fine, even though she wasn't. He smiled gently, brushing his thumb across the back of her hand. He knew what she meant. She didn't want him to worry. She didn't want strangers to see her struggling. But he wasn't going to pretend with her. Not when it came to her health. He told her softly that it was all right to not feel okay. He told her that he was right there with her, and she didn't need to hide anything. She nodded. But her breathing didn't steady the way he hoped it would. The engines outside made a deeper noise, a sign that they were preparing to take off soon. The father felt a wave of urgency tighten his chest. Once the plane lifted into the air, they would be stuck in their seats for at least several minutes. No one would be able to bring water until after the flight reached cruising altitude. That meant waiting longer, too long for his daughter's comfort. He looked up the aisle again. The flight attendant who had refused him earlier stood near the front, adjusting a safety demonstration kit as if everything in the world was normal. She didn't glance in his direction once. She didn't check on the girl. She didn't seem aware, or perhaps didn't want to be aware, of the distress she had caused. The father did not want to confront her again. He disliked unnecessary conflict, especially in front of his daughter. But he could feel the urgency rising, not in anger, but in fear that she might get worse before anyone would help. He knew he couldn't force the plane to stop moving. He also knew he couldn't sit and do nothing. A few rows behind them, a woman with gentle eyes leaned slightly forward again. She had been watching quietly, trying not to intrude but clearly concerned. She asked in a low voice if he needed anything, if maybe she could help. He thanked her softly, grateful for the kindness, but there wasn't anything she could do. Unless someone had water hidden in a personal bag, which was unlikely, they were all stuck following the same rules. He didn't want to break a rule that could get someone else in trouble. He only wanted a basic necessity for his daughter. The girl lifted her head slightly from his shoulder, her eyes drifting toward the front of the plane. She said in a tiny voice that the plane felt loud. He knew that was her way of saying her head felt strange. He placed a hand behind her back to steady her. Her skin felt cooler than usual, which made him tense inside. The plane began to turn toward the runway for takeoff. The father tightened his seatbelt, while still keeping one arm wrapped around her. He could feel the slight tremble in her body growing stronger. Her breathing became shallow, and she squeezed her eyes shut. He whispered again that she would be okay, but she only nodded faintly. At that moment, as the flight attendant passed near their row to check seatbelts, she didn't look at them until the very last second, and even then, her eyes flicked past them, as if hoping not to engage. But the father raised a hand slightly, not dramatically, not aggressively, just enough to get her attention. She paused, unwillingly, and stared at him with the same rigid expression from earlier. He spoke quietly, carefully, asking again if she could please bring water before takeoff. He explained that his daughter's symptoms were getting worse. He asked not as someone demanding special treatment, but as a parent whose child needed help. The attendant sighed sharply, as if the request were unreasonable. She repeated the same line again, about procedures and timing and rules, her voice cool and unmoving. She said the plane was about to take off, and nothing could be done until later. Then she added something that made the father look at her more closely. She told him he should have handled his daughter's needs before getting on the plane, as if he had somehow caused this situation. He opened his mouth to reply, but before he could say anything, the woman behind them leaned forward more firmly this time. She spoke in a calm but serious tone, telling the attendant that the girl looked unwell and needed water for medical reasons. Her voice was steady, but not disrespectful. She explained that she worked in healthcare and recognized the signs his daughter was showing. The attendant stiffened, her expression turning defensive. She told the passenger that she was interfering, that she did not understand the rules of the airline, and that she needed to stay in her seat. A few heads lifted around the cabin. The woman behind them did not argue further, but the concern in her eyes intensified. The girl was now breathing a little faster, clutching her father's sleeve. He gently brushed her hair back from her forehead. She whispered that her chest felt strange, and he felt a sharp pang in his heart. He knew that the stress of the moment might be making her anxiety mix with her physical discomfort. He tried once more to speak with the attendant, but she cut him off immediately, telling him with finality to wait like everyone else. Then she walked quickly toward the front, as if she had finished the conversation completely. A low murmur began spreading through the cabin. People exchanged glances. A man across the aisle shook his head quietly. Someone 2 rows ahead whispered to their partner. Attention grew, not loud, but steady, like a dull hum in the background. The plane came to a stop at the start of the runway. The girl tried to sit upright, but her head swayed slightly, and she leaned back again. Her father guided her gently, helping her rest against his arm. She whispered that she felt a little dizzy, and he could feel the fear rising in her little voice. Even though she tried to hide it, he rubbed her shoulder, telling her softly to breathe slowly. He wished more than anything that he could trade places with her, take the discomfort away, carry it himself instead. But all he could do was hold her and wait. The engines roared louder, signaling the start of takeoff. The girl flinched, gripping her father's hand tight. He reassured her again, though his own voice was careful, controlled. He kept glancing at the aisle, hoping one of the attendants other than the first one might look their way. But they were all strapped in their seats now, buckled and unable to move until the plane reached the right height. The father took a deep breath. He felt the plane push forward, gaining speed. Outside the window, the ground blurred into a streak of color. The girl held her breath for a moment, then released it shakily. He held her closer. Wishing the flight would hurry and level out so he could get help, the wheels lifted off the ground, and the cabin tilted slightly. A few people whispered, "Here we go," but in the father's row, the moment felt heavy. The ascent continued, the pressure shifting. The girl swallowed, but her throat felt too dry. She breathed through her mouth, small, shaky breaths that made him worry even more. When the plane finally steadied at a slight angle, her body relaxed just a little, but her eyes stayed closed. She whispered that she felt lightheaded. The father brushed her cheek gently. He told her he was proud of how strong she was. She squeezed his hand weakly. The moment the seatbelt sign dinged and the light turned off, passengers began moving slightly, adjusting themselves. The attendants prepared to stand again. The father sat upright, ready, waiting, hoping that maybe this time someone else would come down the aisle who would listen. But before anyone could move, the girl's breathing grew irregular again, and her head tilted slightly against him. He whispered her name softly, urging her to stay calm, but she seemed too tired to respond properly. Her small hand pressed against her chest, not hard, but enough to tell him she felt uncomfortable inside. He took another breath, steadier than he felt. He knew that the situation was nearing a point where he could not stay quiet anymore. The fear for his daughter was deeper now, settling in his stomach like a heavy stone. The passengers around them sensed it too, their faces filled with concern. They watched the aisle, waiting to see what would happen when the attendants walked out. The father looked at his daughter, then at the front of the plane, and he knew something clearly now. He would not let this continue. The moment an attendant got close enough to listen in, he was going to speak. And this time, he would not let his words be dismissed. He had stayed patient. He had stayed calm. He had followed every rule. But now, with his daughter's comfort slipping further away, he could feel the shift inside himself. The next part of this journey would not be quiet. The cabin lights glowed softly as the plane steadied in the sky. But the tension around the father and his daughter felt heavier than the air itself. Passengers nearby had gone quiet, watching the little girl with worried eyes. No one said anything too loudly, but the silence held their concern tightly, as if everyone was quietly hoping help would arrive soon. The girl leaned heavier against her father, her breathing uneven. Her small fingers curled into his sleeve, gripping it like she needed something solid to hold on to. Her eyes stayed half closed, not from sleepiness, but from the uncomfortable pressure in her head. She whispered that her chest felt weird again, and her father lowered his head to her level, telling her gently to breathe slow and steady. Every part of him wanted to fix everything instantly. He had always been the kind of person who solved problems efficiently, calmly, without making scenes. But this was his daughter, not a business issue, and watching her struggle made him feel something tight and sharp beneath his ribs. The seatbelt light had already gone off, and the attendants were beginning to stand and move down the aisle. The father sat upright, watching their movements carefully. His daughter needed help now, and he refused to let another moment slip by. He kept his arm around her while looking ahead, hoping the first attendant wouldn't be the one to reach their row. Unfortunately, She stepped out from behind the curtain near the front, straightened her uniform, and started down the aisle with a clipboard in hand. Her face still held that same stiff, uninterested expression, as if she had already decided no one could convince her she had done anything wrong earlier. The father exhaled slowly. He wanted someone else, anyone else, but she was the one walking toward them. Passengers near their row straightened in their seats, sensing what was coming. The woman from behind the father, the one who had offered help earlier, sat forward again but said nothing yet. She seemed ready to speak if needed, ready to support. When the attendant reached them, the father raised his hand slightly. This time he did not ask softly. His voice was still controlled, but stronger, firmer. He told her again that his daughter needed water immediately, not later. He said her symptoms had gotten worse, and that waiting any longer wasn't safe. The attendant didn't even glance at the girl right away. She looked at the father, as if she had already prepared a speech in her head. She told him once again that service had not officially started, and that he needed to be patient. She said the request had been noted, and she would get to it when she could. Her voice lacked any sense of urgency or care. as though she was discussing something far less important. The father's jaw tightened. He asked her clearly if she understood that withholding water during a medical need could cause harm. She responded that she wasn't a doctor and couldn't judge what was or wasn't necessary. Then, almost dismissively, she added that he was making a scene and should avoid disrupting other passengers, Wave of disbelief moved through the rows around them. The man across the aisle muttered something under his breath. A person in front turned their head slightly, listening. The woman behind them could no longer hold back. She leaned forward and said firmly that the girl needed water now. She explained again, more directly this time, that she had medical training and recognized the signs of a blood sugar shift. She said it was irresponsible to refuse something so simple that could prevent the situation from worsening. The attendant shook her head, insisting she couldn't break procedure just because people felt it was important. She emphasized the word felt in a way that made a few passengers stare at her with disbelief. The little girl tried to sit up straighter, watching the adults around her. Her voice was small when she said she felt dizzy. Her father gently held her shoulders, helping her stay balanced. He could feel her pulse fluttering faster than normal, and the urgency in his chest grew stronger. He looked at the attendant, said he wanted to speak with the lead attendant immediately. Not later. Not after service. Now, his tone wasn't harsh, but it carried a weight that made a few people in the cabin look up fully. He was done being patient. The attendant crossed her arms, telling him that the lead attendant was busy and he would need to calm down and wait his turn. Her words sounded rehearsed, almost like she was more focused on asserting authority than understanding the situation. The father stared at her, stunned that she could be so unmoved. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't threatening. He was simply asking for water, one small cup, and for someone to listen to him about his child. Yet she acted like he was interrupting her day for something trivial. Before he could reply, the girl's breathing changed again. She pressed a hand lightly to her forehead, whispering that her vision felt blurry. The father looked down quickly, his heart jumping. He placed his hand gently on the side of her face, asking her to keep her eyes open. She tried, but her eyelids fluttered. That was the moment when the passengers around them reacted more openly. The woman behind them quickly unbuckled her seatbelt and leaned forward. Placing a hand lightly on the girl's shoulder, she asked in a steady voice if the girl could still hear her. The girl nodded faintly. Someone 2 rows ahead stood halfway up from their seat and called out, "She needs help now." Another passenger pressed the call button repeatedly. A soft ripple of urgency spread through the cabin. The attendant stiffened at the attention. Clearly uncomfortable now that other people were involved, she told everyone sternly to stay in their seats and stop interfering. She said she would handle it, though she had done nothing so far except refuse. The father stood partially, still holding his daughter. His voice remained calm, but there was no softness left in it. He told the attendant again that water was non-negotiable now. He said he wasn't asking, he was informing her of a medical need that required basic action. The attendant responded sharply that he was being aggressive. The accusation made several passengers gasp. One man across the aisle said out loud that nothing the father had done was aggressive. He said the only unreasonable behavior he saw was the refusal of help. The tension grew heavier. But now, it wasn't just around the father's row. It spread to the whole section. People looked toward the front of the plane, expecting someone in charge to appear. Passengers who had been quiet earlier now turned their full attention to what was happening at that moment. Another attendant, different from the first, stepped into the aisle. She had been coming from the back, unaware of the earlier conflict. When she reached the row, her eyes widened at the sight of the girl's pale face and her trembling hands. She asked immediately what was wrong. Passengers started speaking over one another, trying to explain. The father spoke clearly, telling her what had been happening since before takeoff. He said this was the second request for water and that the girl had diabetes. The new attendant's expression changed instantly. Without hesitation, she said she would bring water right away and turned to move down the aisle. But before she could take 2 steps, the first attendant blocked her with an outstretched arm. A shocked gasp rose from the passengers. The first attendant told her colleague they needed to follow procedure and not give in to pressure. The new attendant looked stunned. Glancing between the girl and the colleague, blocking her path, she tried to step around, but the first attendant held her ground, saying she would handle it. The father felt his stomach turn. He had never imagined something so simple could turn into a power struggle. The thought that someone's personal stubbornness was being placed above his child's safety made his pulse quicken in a way he rarely experienced. The woman behind them spoke again, louder this time. She told the new attendant that the girl's condition could become dangerous if she didn't get water soon. Her voice shook slightly, not with anger, but with urgency. A man from a nearby road chimed in, saying he had watched everything and that the first attendant had refused help multiple times. Another person added that this wasn't about rules anymore. It was about a child. The first attendant looked around the cabin, frustration rising in her face. She told everyone to mind their own business. But it was too late for that. Once people saw a child in distress, they couldn't unsee it. They couldn't sit quietly anymore. The new attendant stepped back, clearly conflicted. She wanted to help, but she also looked worried about going against her colleague. The father realized he needed to do more. He didn't want to scare anyone or create chaos, but his daughter's breathing was becoming shallow again. Her small fingers clenched into his hand like she was trying to hold on to something steady. He turned slightly and called out toward the front of the cabin, asking if the lead attendant or captain could be informed immediately. His voice was strong, but not harsh. He wasn't shouting. He was calling for help, real help. The first attendant snapped that he was causing a disruption. She would report him. The father did not look at her this time. He kept his focus on the front of the plane and raised his voice again, calling for assistance. Passengers near the front heard him and quickly pressed their call buttons. Someone shouted for the lead attendant. Another person said loudly that a child was unwell and needed help. The girl whimpered softly, leaning fully into her father's chest. He lowered his head to her ear, telling her he was right here, that he wasn't going anywhere, that she should just keep breathing. She whispered that she felt tired. He told her to stay with him, to keep her eyes open if she could. The tension inside him was no longer just worry, it was fear. The kind that rises when someone you love is slipping out of comfort and into danger. The aisle filled with murmurs and shifting movements. Passengers weren't yelling wildly, but they were stepping in, refusing to let the situation be ignored any longer. The woman behind them reached forward, placing a calming hand on the girl's back again. She told the father softly that the girl's breathing pattern wasn't good and they needed water sooner rather than later. Finally, after what felt like far too long, a voice from the front called out, asking what was happening. The lead attendant appeared, walking briskly down the aisle. Passengers pointed toward the row, explaining the situation in overlapping pieces. The first attendant stood rigid, her face tense, as the lead attendant approached. The tension between them was visible. Even before any words were exchanged, the father held his daughter close. Watching the lead attendant approach with a mix of hope and desperation, he hoped this person would listen. He hoped someone would take responsibility. He hoped this moment, this frightening moment, would finally be acknowledged. The lead attendant reached their row and looked at the girl's pale face, her trembling hands, the distress in her eyes. And that was the moment everything began to shift. The moment the father stood up. The energy inside the cabin changed. It was not loud, but there was something in the way he rose that made people stop what they were doing. He did not shout. He did not wave his arms. He simply stood in a steady, controlled way, as if he had already reached the point where patience had done all it could. His daughter watched him with wide, tired eyes. She was still holding the cup of water the kind nurse had given her, sipping it slowly as she tried to steady her breathing. He checked on her first. He leaned down, placed a hand lightly on her shoulder, and asked if she was okay. She gave a small nod, but he could see she was still nervous. Her skin was a little pale around her lips, and she looked like she was trying hard to stay strong. He brushed her hair gently away from her face, giving her a soft smile. Only then did he straighten again, turn toward the aisle. The flight attendant, who had caused all the trouble, was standing a few rows away, arms crossed, looking tense but stubborn. She watched him like she expected a fight. Passengers nearby exchanged glances, waiting to see what would happen. Some held their breath, hoping things would finally get addressed properly. The father began walking toward the front, moving slowly but with clear intention. He wasn't trying to scare anyone. He just wanted someone who could take responsibility. His steps were calm, steady, almost too quiet for a man whose child had just been refused basic help. Passengers watched him pass, some gently nodding as if giving silent support. Halfway up the aisle, the first attendant stepped into his path. She held up her hand like a barrier and said he needed to return to his seat. Her voice was sharper now, like she was trying to take control back after losing it. She warned him that he could be reported for standing during taxiing, and that he was causing a disturbance, but he did not. Step back. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He just looked at her straight and said, "I need to speak to the lead attendant or the captain. Not later. Now." His voice was steady, the kind that carried without needing volume. It was not a request born from anger, but from responsibility. The attendant started to repeat the rule again, insisting he sit down. Before she could finish, a passenger from behind spoke up, telling her that the father had every right to ask for help. Another person added that the situation never needed to be this serious if she had just gotten the water when he first asked. A third voice said that keeping a child from water, especially one with a medical problem, was dangerous. The attendant stiffened, caught off guard by how many people were stepping in. Meanwhile, the girl's nurse neighbor, who had helped earlier, gently raised her hand and said she would personally explain to the lead attendant why the father was up and why they needed assistance immediately. Her calm tone helped settle some of the tension. The father gave her a grateful nod. Finally, after a tense pause, the second flight attendant, the one who had delivered the water earlier, came forward. She seemed nervous as she told them she would call the lead attendant right away. Her voice shook slightly, not out of fear of the father, but because she could feel the atmosphere inside the cabin tightening with expectation. Within moments, the lead attendant appeared, walking briskly down the aisle. She looked like she understood that something serious was happening. She approached the father, asked calmly what the issue was, and listened without interrupting. The father explained everything in clear, simple words: the repeated refusals, the dismissiveness, the danger it put his daughter in. He didn't exaggerate. He didn't try to embarrass anyone. He just told the truth. The lead attendant's expression shifted from confusion to concern to disbelief as the story unfolded. She apologized to him, genuinely, and asked if his daughter was stable now. He nodded and said the water helped, but she was still shaken. The lead attendant said she would inform the captain, because medical safety before takeoff was something they had to report, before anyone could move further. The captain himself appeared at the entrance of the cabin. He had likely been monitoring the situation from the front and came out because it was delaying the flight. He approached the father with a calm, measured voice. Asking if everything was okay, the father explained everything again, keeping his tone respectful but firm. The captain listened carefully, giving his full attention. He looked shocked when he heard that water had been denied twice, even after being told it was for a medical need. He looked around the cabin, perhaps noticing the many passengers quietly nodding in agreement with the father's account. Without hesitation, the captain instructed the crew to stop taxiing and informed them that they would not take off until the matter was resolved. He said the safety of a child always came before the schedule. The plane slowly halted, and a stillness filled the cabin. Passengers showed no annoyance. If anything, they looked relieved that someone in authority was finally handling things properly. The first attendant, the one who had refused the water, looked stunned. She stood frozen, eyes shifting from the captain to the passengers to the father. For the first time since the beginning of the flight, she seemed unsure, not defensive. It's not irritated, just uncertain about how everything had turned so serious so quickly. The captain turned to the father and asked if his daughter needed anything else. He offered to call for medical assistance or delay the flight further if needed. The father thanked him sincerely and said his daughter was doing better after drinking water, but she was still frightened by how she had been treated. The captain nodded, then asked the father privately if he felt comfortable continuing the flight with the current crew, or if he preferred adjustments to be made. The father took a moment to look back at his daughter. She was sitting quietly, clutching her cup, trying to stay strong. He could see the worry still in her eyes. He told the captain that he did not want to escalate the situation more than necessary. He said he simply wanted his daughter to feel safe for the rest of the flight, and hoped the crew would understand the seriousness of their actions. The captain agreed completely and assured him that he would personally ensure the flight ran smoothly from this point forward. Passengers watched as the captain spoke privately with the lead attendant. There was no yelling, but the message was clear from the captain's steady, serious expression. After a moment, the lead attendant nodded and called over the second attendant, signing her to take over the section where the family was seated. The father returned to his daughter, sitting beside her, and giving her a soft smile. She leaned into him, her head resting lightly on his side. He whispered something to her, something meant only for her. She finally took a deep breath that sounded a little steadier. The second attendant approached carefully, keeping her voice low and gentle. She asked if the girl needed anything else. Snacks, more water, a blanket, anything at all. The girl shook her head shyly, and the attendant placed a small pack of tissues and an extra bottle of water on her tray. Just in case. People around them began settling back into their seats, though the energy in the cabin was still warm with care. Some passengers gave the father small nods or comforting smiles. One whispered, "You did the right thing." Another whispered that they were glad the girl was okay. The father didn't bask in any of it, simply squeezed his daughter's hand and kept his focus on her. Finally, after the captain returned to the cockpit and the crew finished making their adjustments, the plane slowly started moving again. The father leaned back, breathing out quietly, as if releasing a weight he'd been carrying since the beginning of the ordeal. His daughter looked up at him. Her voice was weak but steady when she whispered, "Thank you." He smiled and said, "Always." And though the plane had only just begun to move again, something inside the cabin had already shifted. People were no longer just strangers sharing a flight. They were witnesses, supporters, and silent companions in a moment that revealed how important simple kindness could be. The father held his daughter close as the engines grew louder. The moment had passed, but the meaning of it stayed with everyone on board. The plane moved steadily through the sky, the engines humming in a steady rhythm that filled the cabin like a soft background song. The tension that once gripped everyone had slowly faded, leaving behind a calm that felt almost gentle. The girl rested against her seat, sipping small amounts of water every now and then, while her father kept a protective eye on her. She seemed better now, still a little tired, but her breathing was steady and her color had returned. He held her hand lightly, not squeezing too tight, just enough to remind her he was there. Every few minutes she'd look up at him, and he'd smile, a real one that reached his eyes. It was the kind of smile that said she was safe, and she was. The worst part had passed. And now all that remained was a quiet effort to make sure nothing else went wrong. Passengers around them stayed warm and friendly. The nurse who had helped earlier leaned forward once or twice, checking on the girl with caring eyes. When the girl nodded that she felt better, the nurse gave her a gentle thumbs up. A couple across the aisle whispered that they were glad everything was sorted out. It felt like the entire cabin had been wrapped in an invisible thread of shared relief. The second attendant, the one now in charge of their section, kept coming by with a soft-toned, "Let me know if you need anything." She placed extra napkins, another bottle of water, and a small snack on the tray, careful not to disturb the girl. She even apologized again, though softly, almost in a whisper, making sure the moment didn't embarrass anyone. The father accepted with a polite nod. He wasn't the type to hold grudges. He simply wanted respect, safety, and kindness for his child. Meanwhile, the lead attendant came by once more. She approached slowly, her posture respectful and her expression apologetic. She bent down slightly so she wasn't towering over them and asked if the girl felt well enough to continue the flight. The father said she was feeling much better, and the girl gave a small smile to prove it. The lead attendant apologized again, properly, this time saying she would report the incident to the captain and make sure the airline reviewed everything. The father nodded. He appreciated the sincerity, but he didn't say much else. He didn't need to. People could tell from the calm look in his eyes that he wasn't out for revenge or spectacle. His only concern was his child. After some time passed, the captain made an announcement. His voice was steady, warm, and reassuring. He spoke to all the passengers, thanking them for their patience and explaining that there had been a medical concern that required attention before takeoff. He did not mention the details, nor did he point fingers. He simply emphasized that the safety of everyone on board would always come first. Passengers nodded to one another, understanding exactly what he meant. The girl rested her head on her father's arm toward the middle of the flight. He covered her with a soft airline blanket and gently rubbed her back, not in a rushed way, but in slow circles that helped her relax. She drifted into a light sleep, and he looked out the window, watching the soft glow of the clouds below. It gave him time to think about what had happened, about what it revealed, and about how small moments could teach big lessons. He wasn't angry anymore. He was disappointed, yes, but his heart wasn't heavy with bitterness. He just wished people understood how important it was to listen, to be patient, and to caring for a moment. That was all it took to keep someone from being hurt. After nearly half an hour, the girl woke up quietly. She blinked a few times, looking around like she was trying to remember where she was. Then she looked up at her father and whispered that she felt much better. He smiled and smoothed her hair again. She stretched her arms a little and took another sip of water. Soon the cabin lights dimmed slightly, signaling that the flight was approaching its final stretch. People started closing their trays, organizing their bags, and adjusting their seats. The soft chime overhead told everyone they'd begin descending soon. There was a kind of peaceful silence in the air, like everyone had decided to leave the earlier tension behind. The captain made another announcement, letting the passengers know they would be landing shortly. The girl straightened her blanket and sat upright, still holding her father's hand. She looked calm now, peaceful even. It was clear she trusted her father more than anything else in the world. As the plane descended, the clouds outside the window thinned out, revealing a city slowly coming into view. Lights twinkled in patterned lines, stretching across roads and neighborhoods. The girl pressed her face gently against the window, admiring the small glowing dots below. Her father watched her with soft eyes. Moments like this reminded him why he always worked so hard, not for the title he carried, not for the money people thought CEOs chased, but for her safety, her future, her peace. When the plane finally touched down, the landing was smooth. People clapped lightly, not the loud, enthusiastic claps some flights got, but a gentle, appreciative set of pats that sounded almost like a shared sigh of relief. Passengers exchanged small smiles, as if silently agreeing that this flight had connected them in a strange, unexpected way. The father waited as people began to stand and pull down their bags. He didn't rush his daughter. He helped her with her seatbelt, made sure she had the water bottle in her hand, and lightly guided her to stand. She stretched, still looking a little tired, but her small smile told him she was okay. The nurse came by once more and asked if she had recovered fully. The girl nodded and quietly thanked her for helping earlier. The nurse waved it off with a warm smile, saying she was just glad she had been close enough to help. As they slowly moved down the aisle, toward the exit, the lead attendant waited near the door. Her posture was respectful, and she looked humbled. She apologized again to the father, promising him the situation would be addressed seriously. Also leaned down slightly to tell the girl she hoped she felt better soon. The girl nodded politely. Right behind them, the captain stood outside the cockpit, greeting passengers as they left. When he saw the father and daughter, he paused, thanked the father for staying calm, and thanked the girl for being brave. The father responded kindly, telling him he appreciated the way the crew handled the situation after they understood how serious it was. The captain bowed his head slightly and said they would review everything carefully. He promised that what happened would not be ignored. Then he stepped back, letting the father and daughter move on.